You are listening to episode 6 of The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
Hi, Walter. Good morning. It's Emily Sachar, and I'm the editor of the Daily Catch.
Good morning. In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading. Emily, let's catch up.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so our first topic is the Red Hook Boat Club story.
Yes.
What's new?
All right. Well, first of all, I want to fix an error. On the last podcast, I said that the cost of being a member of the Red Hook Boat Club was $420 a month. That was just a speako, like a typo. It's actually $420 a year. So this story has flipped a little bit in that over the last few days, we've been hearing about problems that Robert McKeon has been articulating. They arose from a couple of interesting details. One is that apparently 2 or so weeks ago, when Robert McKeon was running a town board meeting, there was some vandalism at his house, the details of which have eluded us. We don't know exactly what happened. We don't know exactly what time. We don't think there has been an arrest. If there has been, it has not been publicized to us. The police apparently are continuing to investigate that. Secondly, in late April, there was a post made by a gentleman who has now been charged with a crime, a misdemeanor, urging people to go burn down buildings owned by Robert McKeon, who is a farmer, a cattle farmer, who has property, as we have discussed previously, all over Red Hook. And he reported that threat to the police. And on late Friday, we heard about the arrest of, the charges filed against apparently a Red Hook man who has moved or is living in Kansas. So we will be watching those. Now, what that has prompted Robert McKeon to articulate is that he believes people are not speaking out in support of the eminent domain project because they're afraid of retaliation, they're afraid of threats, they're afraid of hurt and injury. So he is utilizing these criminal activities on the part of others to make a defense for why so far we have only heard, with but one exception, from people who are in opposition to the eminent domain.
So, Emily, back at the hearing that took place at the Red Hook High School last week, the 4.5-hour hearing, not one person spoke up in favor of the boat club takeover, correct?
That's true. The place where we heard about this, where we heard somebody speak up in support, was at a town board meeting. It may have been the same town board meeting at which the vandalism is alleged to have taken place, but we have not seen anyone in support. Now, that said, the Daily Catch has received a number of anonymous notes from people who are in support, but we don't run anonymous notes in our newspaper. We have places where people can send us their comments. They can post at the end of articles. They can also send letters to the editor. And if we are able to identify the writer or the speaker, the person in contact with us, we will sometimes use initials only. But we have to have a way to identify the person who is sending the message to us so that we're not pushing something out into the world that is hypothetical. And we also need that for our own credibility. So it is going to be very interesting to watch this over the next few weeks.
So back to the person who has been charged in Kansas, how do police handle arrests outside of the state?
Yes. So they have issued a warrant. They asked the gentleman, whose name, again, we do not yet have, hopefully we will get it soon, they invite the person to surrender automatically, to come for an arraignment or something similar to an arraignment at town court in Red Hook, which is where this case would be handled. Apparently, that gentleman refused or declined the opportunity to voluntarily surrender himself. So now they have issued a warrant for his arrest. And we will see where that goes. That happened late Friday, or we learned of it late Friday, so we don't know if there was any activity over the weekend.
So to put this boat club story in some kind of context, have we ever seen a reaction to a situation like this with so much emotion and so much energy?
We have seen stories, just even in the lifetime of the Daily Catch, that involved a great deal of emotion. The one that comes to mind for me is in December of 2021, when the town of Red Hook began a public hearing on short-term rentals. There were 112 people that showed up for the very first public hearing. It was held on Zoom, which in some ways made it easier for people to attend. It was at the height of the COVID pandemic. But the difference in that case is that we heard from people on both sides, and people were not anonymous. I think because there was so much disagreement and there were two sides of that discussion, people felt more comfortable coming out, even in opposition to their neighbors. What's made this one difficult is that so far we've seen no public reaction in support of the eminent domain, which, to McKeon's point, doesn't mean that there aren't people in support, but there hasn't been an environment, perhaps because of the climate we live in right now politically, where people have felt they could come out in support.
I also think the difference between the Airbnb situation and this situation is the boat club story is very simple. It's very clear what McKeon wants to do. So it's a much more black and white situation. And I think people are probably responding to that more quickly.
That's a really, really good point, Walter, because of course, the Airbnb proposal had many legs to it. It affected many different kinds of people in different zoning areas. In the RD5, it was this. In the RD1, it was this. And you're absolutely right. This is crystal clear. It's very easy to understand. It doesn't take a lot to explain what eminent domain is to people.
So what should listeners and readers be looking for to hear from us next?
We'll be continuing to follow the arrest, or whatever it's called, when this person ends up coming through to Red Hook. We'll, of course, be very curious on the identity of that individual. We'll be wanting to know if that person has any connection to the boat club. And we'll, of course, be continuing to follow the next moves of the town board. The boat club proposal is now in front of the planning board, which has 30 days, unless they are able to get an extension, to review its compliance with the local waterfront revitalization program that was last articulated in 1995. A modified update to that plan is sitting in front of New York State right now for review. We don't know when that will come through, but the action of the planning board in terms of discussing the eminent domain alignment with the waterfront plan will be our next big data point. So we'll be following closely.
Great. So lots more to come. Let's move on to our second topic, which is the school board elections, which took place last week in both Red Hook and Rhinebeck. Let's start by talking about what happened in Red Hook.
Yeah, so Red Hook was a very interesting election. Very different issues really were on the ballots in both communities. In Red Hook, the big topic was, would voters support a grass field for what's called Field 1, the main demonstration field between the high school and the middle school, after turning down 3 different times artificial turf for that field under a variety of different ideas. And the answer was, yes, we will support grass. And that proposal passed overwhelmingly. So that was good news for the athletes, very good news for the athletic director who's been working on this issue since 2019.
And just a real quick sidebar, if I can jump in. You and I were at the career fair at the Red Hook High School last Tuesday, which was great fun. But I talked to a couple of students who played sports, and they talked about the need for their field to be repaired. So this is a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. It was really wonderful to be there with the kids and talk to them in firsthand, wasn't it, Walter? A great group of kids go to that school, so hats off. The second topic that was on the agenda, which was also complicated just by virtue of some of the explanations that had to precede it, was the topic of EV buses, electric buses. School districts around the state have a number of years, but it's coming up very quickly to convert their entire fleet of school buses to electric. And Red Hook has started that initiative, but today, or last week, I should say, asked voters to approve 4 new electric buses. Now, it seems simple. The problem here is that the school district has arranged through grants and school aid formulas to only have to pay about $10,000 for the initiative, no matter what. But that's not how it read on the ballot, because they must disclose the cost of the buses themselves. So they did a very strong information campaign, and I'd like to think that we assisted in explaining that what you're voting for is not 1 point something million for buses. You're voting for a very small outlay from the district. And that passed overwhelmingly as well. Now, the complicated issue in both communities was the race for school board, but much simpler in Red Hook. Red Hook had 2 openings, 4 candidates. The teachers union made 2 endorsements, and the 2 candidates they endorsed, Kelly Borelli, who's an incumbent, and Patrick Boyd, the brother of the principal of Mill Road School, both passed. They both were endorsed by the teachers union. They both were elected. One incumbent, Charlie Kajigian, was defeated, and so was a professor who works with the Bard Prison Initiative at Bard College, both defeated at the ballot box. It was a very straightforward election. There wasn't a lot of contention about the candidates. Very different from what we had in Rhinebeck. Shall I jump over to Rhinebeck now?
Let's jump over to Rhinebeck.
So Rhinebeck, Walter, had 9 candidates for 4 spots. 3 of those spots were full, I believe it was 3-year terms, and one of them was to fill out the unexpired term of Amanda Miller, who left early. So it was very interesting because what happened down there, as I think we discussed at our last catch-up episode, was the teachers union in Rhinebeck endorsed 4 candidates. We were all wondering how important and how meaningful would that endorsement be with voters. And the answer, Walter, was not so meaningful. One of the 4 candidates they endorsed made it onto the school board, and he got the 4th highest number of votes. So he will just fill out that one unexpired term. The 2 incumbents were both handily reelected. The board chair, Steve Jenkins, and another woman, Juliet Gorman, both reelected with 1st and 2nd place. And then a 3rd candidate was also elected to the board. So that's the election in Rhinebeck.
So if the endorsement of the teachers union did not help to influence voters' decisions, what do you think did influence voters' decisions?
Well, when incumbents are reelected, what that usually tells us is the voters are pleased with the direction of the school board. They're pleased with how things are going. They're pleased with the work that these people are doing. Steve Jenkins is known for being fiscally austere and careful, and there seems to have been some concern that when the next teacher's contract came up, if the board tilted too heavily in favor of the teachers union, that could cause runaway price increases, and that would mean increases in taxes. So that's just my, armchair adjudication of the situation, but that's the way it looks to me. We also have next year the renegotiation of the contract with the superintendent, Albert Cousins. So it seems that the voters endorsed returning to the board the people who have the most history with that discussion.
Makes sense.
So we'll be watching now to see what changes, if any, come along with the school board. And I should mention as well that in their budget, which was approved, and both communities approved the budgets, is an additional pre-K class in Rhinebeck. So that, in fact, in Red Hook as well. So that's really great to see both communities embracing the need for a pre-K class, which is universal, of course, in New York City and is making its way upstate.
Absolutely. So let's move on to our next topic. This past weekend, we had a very sad anniversary. It was the 1-year anniversary of the death of the Bard piano student who was killed by a car in Red Hook Village. Why don't we start by just recapping the story, if you could, for people who may not know all the details?
Yes, of course. So on May 25th, exactly a year ago, the night of her Bard graduation from the Bard Conservatory, where Linh Nguyễn was a piano student in the graduate school, she was struck by what we now know was a speeding car, driven by what we now know was a dozing or sleeping driver at the wheel, struck, killed instantly as the car pivoted 180 degrees, landing facing southbound. The car was coming from the north to the south. And that car pivoted and turned around on the side, right next to the sidewalk. The driver, Rohan Patrick, stayed at the scene. And of course, as you and I have talked about so much, Walter, there was an arrest made, but only about 6 months later. A confounding situation to the community. And as I just found, as I visited Hanoi, a very confounding and upsetting situation to the family.
Let's just talk briefly about the charges that he faced.
Yeah, so he's charged with a felony, but it is a felony that only brings a 1 to 4 year prison term. So Mr. Patrick has pleaded guilty to that charge, and he faced or agreed to take a 1 year prison sentence. Now, the arrest was late last fall, and we're now in May. He has served about 6 months of the 1 year plea deal to which he agreed with the DA's office. So that's where we are with that case. We have not succeeded in speaking to Rohan Patrick. I hope that we will be able to once the plea is solid and the sentence is handed down, which is expected to happen tomorrow. All of that, of course, precursor for why I wanted to go to Hanoi.
So just real quick, before we jump into your trip to Hanoi, the confounding and frustrating part of the story is, as you just said, for most people, was the length of time it took for him to be arrested. What did we learn about why it took so much time?
Yes. So even though Mr. Patrick stayed at the scene, and even though it appeared to several observers that he had been speeding, there was no police officer at the scene. There was no radar at the scene. And after they tested Rohan Patrick for drugs and alcohol, those tests came back clean. The case was then referred to what's called the Accident Reconstruction Unit of the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office. And something that surprised me, Walter, was I didn't realize that cases go into a queue in front of that unit. They're limited in staff, they're limited in resources to run cases through, and it's a very detailed analysis that they do. They need to make sure that they have protected the rights of, in this case, the driver, and so on. And it just took a really long time because this case was behind many, many others. So while there is a time limit, I believe it was 6 months, they were right back up against that time limit in getting this case solved, as it were. And they initially also, because the toxicology came back negative, that made the work of the Accident Reconstruction Unit all the more important. So they do things with physics. They study the angles of trajectory of the vehicle. They look at the vehicle. There are various devices that are now inside of almost all vehicles, that almost like a black box recorder that we talk about on airplanes. And the availability of that kind of information in the car driven by Rohan Patrick was much more limited. So they had to really put a lot of pieces together before they could bring charges. And of course, this DA is as careful as are most good DAs. They want to really take their time and make sure that they're bringing a charge that will hold, that will stick. So they have to assume they're not going to get testimony from the defendant. So they need to make sure that the facts really line up with the charges that they're bringing. I'm not in any way defending what happened here and how long it took place, but I am saying that we at the Daily Catch brought a really tight analysis to that situation and feel that we landed in the right place in explaining it to our readers.
And while it may have been frustrating for people to wait, it appears as if the system worked the way the system should work.
That's a really good point. We did, after all, end up with a criminal charge. We are going to end up with a jail term. I think it's very frustrating to people that somebody could strike a young woman and walk out of jail after a year. After all, if they killed her with a gun, they'd be in jail probably for the rest of their lives. And guns and cars can be weapons of the very same sort. But there was no intent here, and that changes the situation considerably.
So let's transition now and talk about the story that we published over the weekend. In late April, you had the opportunity to go to Hanoi and to meet with Lynn's family.
Yes, that's correct. I want to stress that stories like this that run in the paper and it hits perfectly with the anniversary may seem as if they're done very quickly. Take a flight to Hanoi, talk to Lynn's family, talk to her friends, talk to her teachers, come back and write it up. But actually, we have been working a relationship with Lynn's father in particular, but also with other members of her family and with two of her friends over the course of the last year. And we had hoped very much that it would make sense and that we would be granted an invitation to go, but it took time to work that out. And I was very grateful and honored that Lynn's family wanted then to honor her death and the 1 year anniversary of that death by inviting us to Hanoi. We spent time not only with Lynn's family, with her mother and her father in particular, but we also were invited to visit the Academy of Music, where Lynn studied since she was a very small child, all the way through college. She had gone, at one point, she took a break from Hanoi and went to Europe to study, but she came back to Hanoi before she left for Bard. And we met her main teacher, her first teacher, a number of her piano colleagues, and we met the leader of a school where Lynn taught music. And these were all over Hanoi. So we really were able to get a full picture of Lynn's life, including seeing the motorcycle that she and her father bought together for her to use in her last years of school in Hanoi. Everyone gets around in Hanoi on motorcycles. I don't think I saw more than 10 cars in the heartbeat in the heart of the city the whole time I was there. Everyone's on their motorcycles, and Lynn was too. So it created a really nice picture for us, and I hope our story did justice to not just the story of her death and the sadness of her family and her friends, but also to the way in which she lived and the way she created that life for herself.
So tell us a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of what it was like being there. Kind of, you went from meeting to meeting, you were running around the city. Did you have a translator working with you, or how did that work?
Yeah. So this is one thing that may surprise everybody. I actually was taken around on the back of Lynn's father's motorcycle. He was initially nervous to offer that to me, and I was like, let's go, let's do it. And it created a really nice bond between us because, interestingly, even though it's very noisy as you're biking around on the motorbike, I was able to speak directly into his ear, and he was able to speak directly back to me. And I think we actually had some of our best conversations on the back of that motorcycle. So that was really fun. Now, Lynn's father is fluent in English. Although his English is a little bit broken at times, he has a very clear ability to communicate. He did, however, ask that we have a translator because he said he's so broken up talking about her death and talking about her life. So we had a translator with us for every interview. We didn't need to use that translator very often, but it was really helpful that we had that backup in case we needed it.
Well, it's a beautiful story, so I encourage listeners to take the time to read it if they haven't already. Let's finish by talking about how will the Daily Catch continue to follow this story going forward?
That's such a good question because I call it calendar journalism. We tend to pay attention to major dates. And will we go back to Hanoi for year 2 anniversary? Probably not. But we will certainly tomorrow, assuming the sentencing comes off as it's expected to, we will certainly be in the courtroom for the sentencing. The family has sent a very lengthy victim impact statement to be read aloud. If it is, we of course will cover that. If it's not, we will run the victim impact statement anyway to share with our readers. A piano in Lynn's honor, a portion of which was paid for by a fund that was initiated after Lynn died, will be brought into online at Bard College, and we will cover that. So there are going to still be some small updates to punctuate our news cycle, and we will be covering those. There's also a beautiful tree in Red Hook. There's a tree that has been created as a kind of a memorial. There's a sign for Lynn there. And I notice when I go periodically by there, it's really right across from CVS that people place flowers there periodically. And I think that's been really meaningful for the family. They so don't want their daughter to be forgotten.
What may or may not happen in the village in terms of trying to control the traffic and the speed and what goes on that part of Route 9?
Yeah, so very, very concerning, of course, is that Route 9, like Route 9G, are state roads. So even if the village wanted to slow down the speed limit there, they are not able to do that without state mandate, state approval. And the state is very loath to change speed limits anywhere around the state. However, the village is allowed to put up and has put up, they're not traps, they're speed alerts that tell people how fast they are going. So these are meant to notify people as they're traveling. This is the speed limit coming into the village, 30 miles an hour. You must, slow down, or you should. It doesn't say you must slow down. It's an alert that thanks people for going the speed limit and flashes and tells you to slow down. Of course, I don't know that would have done anything to stop Rohan Patrick, who was sleeping as he got into the village. But that's something that the village has done.
I'm always very careful whether I'm driving through Red Hook Village or Rhinebeck Village. I'm extra careful to watch for people and speed and what have you.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. And this was a very scary area. It's where there's a curve right there in the road. It's very easy. And that's what happened. Rowan Patrick was driving straight and then jumped the curb where Lynn was sitting. And it was late. It was not that late, but it was just after 10 o'clock. So it was dark. So that created a terrible situation.
So let's do something new for listeners this week, Emily. Let's give them a kind of a sneak peek of what is upcoming in the Daily Catch.
That's great. Yeah, we have some big stories coming in the next few days. So, first of all, we have our Democratic caucus in Red Hook this coming Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. So, a plug to encourage Democrats to get out and go to the caucus. It's being held at the Red Hook Community Center. So, we don't have a primary system in Red Hook to elect the people to run on our November ballot. And of course, because the number of Democrats in Red Hook is so high relative to the number of Republicans, the Democratic caucus has outsized significance. We have a contest too this year. We have Christine Kane, the incumbent Democrat, running to hold her seat. And we have two new political upstarts. We have Christina Ducharme, an architect who's been head of the EDC for years and a member of the planning board, running alongside Ken Migliarelli, who's also been a member of the EDC, has participated in many, many committees and open space initiatives and so forth, and a big vegetable farmer in our community. He is an independent, but he is hoping, as is allowed under Democratic rules, to get the nod of the Democratic Party on Saturday, I should say, at the caucus. So we have a very exciting weekend ahead for anyone who has time to participate. This caucus is not open to Republicans or independents. You must be a registered Democratic voter to participate. We also will be following another interesting traffic fatality aftermath. This one, which happened 17 years ago, that will feature our piece, a young woman named Izzy Lutzi, who will be performing in a concert at Bard Olin Auditorium on June 29th. Izzy was born after the death of her mother in utero. Her mother was in a car wreck in Red Hook, kind of on the Red Hook Rhinebeck town line, a few miles south on 9G. Her father is a Bard professor. This young girl was taken by cesarean section about 5 weeks before her due date and rescued at the NICU at Vassar. And we will be running a lengthy story about her path, how she got to where she is today. Her mother, her adopted mother, Helena Bailey, is a very renowned violinist, and she got Izzy into piano when she was just 3 years old. So it's a wonderful story that traces a traffic fatality with a very different kind of ending.
And the connection between Izzy playing the piano and Lynn being the piano player is interesting.
Yeah, it's really ironic, right?
Yeah.
We've had some very terrible traffic fatalities linked up with Bard students and Bard faculty. But it's nice when we can tell a beautiful, positive story, as we will with this one. And then we'll also be, I'm hoping very soon, it won't be this week, but very soon, to be making a tour of the property where the Six Senses project, conference center / hotel, depending on your point of view, is under consideration. And we've been covering that story, as our listeners know, for several weeks now. And we will hope to share with our readers the details of that proposal and where it is today in a story probably coming out in several weeks. But just stay tuned to the Daily Catch for stories about Six Senses.
So we'll be walking the Six Senses property and possibly showing renderings of what they're proposing?
Exactly. And updating. We've been covering that sort of the politics of it, but now a lot of readers want to know on both sides of the story, really, what are they actually planning? And it's gotten a little crazy. I had somebody the other day tell me that there are 10 swimming pools planned for the property. And that was news to me. I hadn't heard that. So I said, you know what? It's time. We got to go over there and walk that property.
Right. Exactly. Good. So lots of good things coming up. Let's close out today's podcast with what we call our top 3. And Emily, I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, how fun. Well, I'm going to try to organize my tips henceforth. My first tip is the French fries and the salad at Beekman Arms. I wonder if people realize that they have a wonderful lunch spot, and it's especially beautiful when you can sit in the outdoor area or semi-outdoor area, the enclosed area outdoors. So that's my food recommendation for this week. I also want to always give a little consumer tip. Have you ever been in a situation where you need a greeting card and you just aren't really in the mood to go to a drugstore or go to a greeting card store to find it? We, of course,
Yes.
have wonderful greeting card stores, but I recently discovered there's a fantastic line of greeting cards at the Williams hardware stores. And I just want to mention that to people. It's a fun way to grab a last minute greeting card and save yourself a trip if you don't need to. And then my last recommendation, this is under my activity experience category, is Falling Waters Preserve in Saugerties. So it is on the other side of the river, but it's only about a 20-minute drive from either Rhinebeck or Red Hook, maybe 23 minutes. Falling Waters Preserve is a scenic Hudson property, and in just a few minutes, you can walk to a beautiful view of the Hudson where you can even skip rocks. You can get that close. I don't know, it's not a great site for launching a boat, so it wouldn't work for the Red Hook Boat Club problem, but it's a fun place to visit. Falling Waters Preserve.
And there is a waterfall, I take it?
There's a waterfall. Yes, I guess that's right. That's the Falling Waters part. And there are various little walking paths there. It's really lovely.
Well, after all the rain we've had these past couple of weeks, the waterfall must be raging.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. Walter, what are your recommendations for the week?
Okay, so here are my top three. The first one is a documentary that I just saw on PBS. It's a Frontline documentary, and I think Frontline does a tremendous job with their shows. This one is called Hurricane Helene's Deadly Warning. It just came out, and most of the documentary focuses on Asheville, North Carolina, where Hurricane Helene in October of 2024 caused a tremendous amount of damage. But the reporter, whose name is Laura Sullivan, she's an NPR reporter who has been covering disasters for years. She goes back to New York City and covers Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and also goes to Houston, where Hurricane Harvey caused a lot of damage in 2017. So what's interesting is she's linking the impact of Helene in 2024, Sandy in 2012, and Harvey in 2017, and talking about, is America prepared for these increasingly violent storms? So it's an extraordinarily well done documentary.
Wow.
Hurricane Helene's Deadly Warning, and you can find it on PBS.
What are your other pieces of advice for us this week, Walter?
Yep. My second recommendation is we're all busy buying plants and flowers to get our gardens ready. I want to do a quick plug for Northern Duchess Botanical Gardens. It's right here in my area of Mullen. They're a nursery. It's an odd name. They call themselves a botanical garden, but it's really a nursery. And they have a great selection of plants and flowers and shrubs. So Northern Duchess Botanical Gardens. Yeah. And the third and final recommendation is a little unusual, but it's one that will hit close to home. I just read this week about a new TV sitcom from NBC that's going to be dropping in September. It's called The Paper, and it's set in the newsroom of a struggling local newspaper in Toledo, Ohio.
Oh, that's right up our alley, Walter, but we're not struggling anymore.
We're not struggling, but I think it'll be great fun. It's by the people who did The Office. So it's going to have that same kind of mockumentary format that The Office had. So it should be great fun. So it's The Paper. It doesn't start until September. But I thought we have to watch that. That's going to be have to watch it.
I love journalistic documentaries, movies, anything that hints at our business, Walter.
Exactly. This concludes our episode of The Catch-Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. A big thank you to Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hamoud of Radio Free Rhinecliff for their help in producing today's episode. And Emily, we'll be catching up again very soon.
Yes, and I hope our listeners will let us know what they think of our show, Walter.
Absolutely.